Thank you so much. Thank you. It's good to be back here tonight, and it's so good to see such a large group from last night. My guess is that many of you brought a friend. Raise your hand if you brought a friend. Okay, wow, a lot of you, thank you. And I see Robert and Jessica, and let me tell you something. You're sitting in the exact perfect chairs tonight. God arranged the chairs last night. But we want to go over, first of all, about what we talked about last night, because some of you are new tonight and didn't hear specifically, but we talked about how God arranges the chairs. It's a phrase I use, arranges the chairs of our life, how he takes things and changes them around based upon our faith in him. And this came from a passage in Luke chapter 14, and it's when Jesus is at a banquet or at a dinner at a rich person's home, and he sees everybody trying to get at the front table, the best seats. And so he says this: when he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, give this person your seat. And he will say to the other person, come sit with me. So that when your host comes, he may say, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of everybody. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And we said that this was a parable not about living by humility, but by living by faith. How when we take our life and place it in a position where only God can change things, arrange the chairs, and we believe that, then he moves and does the miraculous. I came up with a definition that puts all this together, and I want to read it to you again tonight. Faith is the trust in God, which becomes a paradox when our works or actions deny and defy the logical and rational paradigm. Okay? Faith is a trust in God, which becomes a paradox when our works or actions deny and defy the logical and rational paradigm. But this very synergy of belief and works is normal in the kingdom of heaven, where when combined, God intercedes in our world and the miraculous occurs. And that's what we found there in that parable of arranging the chairs. Leaving the head table and going to a place at the far corner by the kitchen door where it's drafty and noisy and cold and a lot of commotion, by taking that seat and trusting God, he then brings us up, he rearranges the seating of the banquet and puts us at the head table. But the person who did by his own works have that seat at the head table, he says to him, friend, you go sit where he was, there by that noisy, cold, drafty kitchen door. Teresa Morgan, a scholar out of Oxford, wrote a book called Roman Faith and Christian Faith. And she asked this question: why is faith so important to Christians? It is a question both obviously significant and surprisingly little discussed. And she says that in the New Testament, the concept of faith and the word faith and the teaching of faith far outnumbers any other teaching that we find in the New Testament. Far more than love, salvation, hope, redemption. Faith is the crux of the New Testament. And she says that The New Testament has this concept of faith, this trust in God, this miraculous happening when we put our faith and our actions working together. That's so strong in the New Testament that as the early believers practiced it and lived by faith, they became known as the faith. And consequently, this phrase came into our vocabulary, so much so that Christianity is really the only faith that you can have in the world without actually believing. So sad. Tonight, I'm going to talk about another very famous, well-known parable, the parable of the prodigal son. And I want to take a look at it tonight because one of the things that we kind of discovered was that if the parable about the banquet table was about faith, maybe we've missed understanding all these other parables. And so let me read this to you. This is our scripture reading for tonight. It's found in Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. And Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father." Notice the parallel with the arranging the chairs. He got up and took the seat farthest from the head table. He got up and said, "I'm going to be a slave." But when he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. In fact, bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered the father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him." "My son," the father says, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." There's a lot of different interpretations that people have used in trying to understand the parables. And after the first century, kind of when the faith came into being, the parables no longer were interpreted as a teaching of faith, but rather as an allegory. An allegory means that the Father is like God, the Son is like the sinner, the goat was like whatever, and so forth and so on. And they attach these things and make a story or an allegory out of it, maybe much like Pilgrim's Progress, which is a great allegory. And that type of interpretation went on from the early church fathers, Irenaeus, all the way through Augustine, all the way through to Martin Luther, all the way through until the late 19th and early 20th century. Until finally the scholars said, no, that's wrong to use allegory to interpret them. These parables have one central meaning, they said, not a multitude. And so all of a sudden, it was different, the way the interpretation comes. But let's take a look at a few interpretations that I have read about and think about them for a moment. The main one is that the Father is God, and that the parable is about the great love that the Father has for his Son. Now, I'm sorry, but I have a terrible time trying to accept that Jesus would waste a teaching to tell people that God loves them. I mean, no. Everybody knew that. Why would you have to have a parable for that? No, the parable was about faith. That's the amazing story here. Others have called it a parable about forgiveness or grace or repentance. And frankly, there have been a lot of other weird teachings throughout the centuries. So where is the element of faith in this parable? I believe it comes when the son, the prodigal son, decides that he's better off if he eats with the pigs. Now that's an amazing concept, that you're better off eating with the pigs. Now that was really quite low. He was at the very bottom of life, wasn't he? And you may have been there, or in fact, maybe you're there tonight. You may have had a death of a child, or of a spouse, or a loved one. And you're having a difficult time going beyond that. You may have had a bankruptcy. You may have lost everything. Some of you may still even be living on the street and have come tonight. You may have had failure, maybe in business or maybe in marriage, maybe in disciplining your children, maybe being the father or the mother that you really know you should be. Or maybe you feel like you're eating with the pigs because emotionally you're just so depressed and drained and can't find a step to get out of that pit. Now, actually, I know a lot about eating with the pigs. No, not that I've actually physically done it, although I've been there in a symbolic way several times. But I was raised on a farm, and our family, we raised pigs. And so my job was to make the swill. Now, does anybody know what swill is? That's spelled S-W-I-L-L. Look it up in the dictionary. Not now. I'll tell you what it is. Swill is when you take the garbage from the kitchen, the banana peels, the leftover, the apple core, the clippings from the beans, the fat on the meat or whatever, the bones, and all this garbage, that you would throw away. On the farm, you didn't do that. You put it in a separate container, and every day you took it out we had a 55-gallon wooden barrel, and we'd put the garbage in there, and we put some oats and some corn, and then you put water in with it, and then you stir it up. And a big stick, and you'd stir this and stir it and stir it, and the oats would start to mush, and so you've got a little bit of oatmeal, and on the oatmeal there's an apple core, and there's some peas left over, and so forth, and you're getting this all churned up, and the pigs, oh man, they're just, you can see the saliva coming out of their mouth, they're so anxious about it, and then you take this and you take a bucket and you throw it in the trough, and oh my, they just love it. Well, that's prodigal son was there doing that. And he says, look at them, they're fat, they're getting all that they want, and I wish I could eat those pods. Now, I don't want anybody to think that I'm making light of the pain that you might be in or that you were in, because that's not right. And if you're not in that pain now, more than likely sometime you will be. The reason I say that is because we know we're all going to die. And death is not a fun event. It's not something that is typically joyful, but it has a lot of pain associated with it. And we may be there at some point. Maybe you are there right now. But if you aren't, and life is really almost perfect for you, this parable is still for you. Because Jesus gave another parable where a man had harvested his grain and he couldn't store it all. And so he said, I'm going to tear down my barns and I'm going to build brand new ones and I'm going to accumulate all this wealth. And God says, tonight I demand your soul. And this may be the night that God demands your soul. This eating with the pigs is a place of despair, discouragement, and desperation, and yet that's where we find the seeds of faith. Let me give you an example. James wrote this very thing, this very subject of faith, feeding the pigs. Listen to it. You probably remember this when I say it. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. So you see, it is there. It is there with the pigs. That's where faith starts. Now, if you're a man or a woman who has brought in your harvest and your barns are full, your faith can be where mentally, in your heart, that's where you are feeding the pigs. You have nothing to offer to God except your faith. That's where He then lifts you up. That's where the hope is. Hebrews says, now faith is a confidence in what we hope for, the assurance of what we do not see. Now, Jesus had a moment when he was feeding the pigs, or living like the pigs. It was not on the cross, that was bad, but frankly, it was the night that he was in Gethsemane. And he brings the disciples aside, and he takes them, and he says to Peter, James, and John, he says, I am deeply grieved, even to death. He was down there. That's where he was. That was not only, he wasn't physically there, but that was his attitude. That's how he felt. There's no place lower than this. And he said, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want. That's faith. And it comes from that moment. I wonder if any of you know where you were or what was happening on January 11th, 1987. Well, many of you weren't born, but I do see some white hair out there. And do you remember? Well, I remember. That was the night, the day, the AFC Championship was being determined. The winner of this football game would go on to the Super Bowl. Super Bowl 21. That was 33 years ago. And something happened that day that still, when you say the words, people understand. The words are the drive. Let's see a show of hands of all of those who know what the drive is. Okay, I see all those, and I see we have some good Denver Bronco fans. Let me tell you, those of you who weren't born or are not that familiar with the football terminology, what actually happened. This was the game, January, in Cleveland. The wind, chilly wind, is blowing off Lake Erie onto the football field. There are 79,915 dog fans yelling, barking, brandishing their milk bones in honor of their beloved dog pound. And the score of the game is the Browns 20 and the Denver Broncos 13. There's 5 minutes and 32 seconds yet to play in the game. Cleveland kicks the ball to Denver. They do a terrible job in getting it, and they end up on the 2-yard line. They have 5 minutes and 32 seconds to get into the end zone 98 yards down the field. And as they're in the huddle, Keith Bishop, the left guard, says to them, guys, we have them right where we want them. Sometimes God has us right where he wants us. Sometimes our life is on the 2-yard line and time is running out. And that's where God has us, right where he wants us, because that is where faith begins. Now, for those of you who remember the game, John Elway makes a pass, first down, makes a pass to Sammy Winder, gets 5 yards. So now they're out of the trouble. They got a little bit of room there in the back. So Sammy Winder runs, and he runs again. They're at the 12-yard line. First down, chains are moved. Another pass. More running. Oops, he gets sacked. An 18-yard pass. And this goes on until finally John Elway throws a pass in the end zone. It's caught, and the game is 20-20. And now there's matter just seconds left. Cleveland cannot win in regulation time. Well, Cleveland kicks the ball, or receives the ball in overtime. They can't make it, so they have to kick it to Denver. Denver makes some running passes, throwing. They get in a position. Rich Carlin kicks the field goal. They win the game. They go to the Super Bowl 21. Okay? I'm telling you, there are times when God has us right where He wants us. And at those times when we're feeling like emotionally, spiritually, like we'd rather eat with the pigs, that's where faith starts. That's when we trust God, the miraculous begins to happen. Now you may be saying, I don't need faith. I'm fine. Everything is going well. Let me tell you, you do. You do need faith. It will come upon you, those moments when you're depressed, when you need help. And unless you are living by faith today, tomorrow, every day, you won't have the strength, you won't have the knowledge, you won't have the maturity, the spiritual maturity to trust God. We must trust God every single day for everything that we need and want. Our daily bread, our sustenance, our life, our love, our peace, our commitment to helping others who are less fortunate. We need God, we need faith for all of those things. But when that day comes, if you're not living by faith, you won't be ready or prepared. No. You won't have the ring on your finger, the robe on your shoulder, the slippers on your feet, the fatted calf at the banquet table. No. That comes through faith. And let me remind you, I have not yet once told about this faith getting you any prosperity or advantages for yourself. No. This is for others. This is for your internal. This is for your relationship with God. That you can say, I trust God. I believe. I have faith in Him. And that's all I need. The just shall live by faith. Thank you.